Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are going to talk about, surprise, surprise, another taboo topic. We're going to talk about money, but we're going to talk about it in a very specific way. Money as it relates to single women and single moms, and everything involved in that world, because finances are different in those situations, and I don't think we talk about it enough. To help us in the discussion, we are joined by Claire Hunsaker. She is a financial advisor for single women and single moms, and a financial educator through her site, AskFlossie.com. After earning her MBA from Stanford, Claire left a 25-year career in business to become a chartered financial consultant. Claire also serves as a volunteer tax preparer with the IRS VITA program with an advanced certification. She is a wife, boy mom, and strong believer in women's financial independence. Amen to that. Claire, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are so excited to talk to you. In fact, I totally did a deep dive on your website this week, so I am so excited to talk to you. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Awesome.
Yay. The first thing I want to say is congratulations. You're a new mom again. Are you still a boy mom?
I am a ride or die, only boys.
Congratulations.
Ironically, because my entire career is about feminism. And of course,
Yep.
I live in a house full of boys.
I think
Nice.
that's perfect, because if anyone can really benefit from feminism, I think it's young boys, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's great and perfect. How did you get started doing what you're now doing?
I started my journey as a person who's interested in personal finance many, many years ago. My parents divorced when I was very young. They both remarried and divorced again. And so when my dad died when I was 22, I had a little bit of a family situation to navigate. And it forced me, very luckily, but very kind of terrifyingly, to get smart on personal finance very quickly. He didn't leave me enough money to make me run off to the Bahamas. It was enough to scare me pretty bad. And I also had a young sister at the time who I was helping with sort of navigating what it means to have money when we had never really talked about it like many women. And so it became a personal interest of mine, stayed a personal interest of mine. I've had a long career in business, from publishing to business consulting to tech marketing, which was, my most recent gig for about 15 years. Ultimately, I made my nut in tech and decided to leave and do something more impactful. I kept asking my female friends, if you were going to dedicate the rest of your career to one issue for women's equality, what would it be? And they all said childcare. And I have to tell you that my interest in childcare is zero. But what has always interested me is women's financial empowerment. It's something that I will, without even trying, chase. I get up and read accounting newsletters in the morning and love it. I started AskFlossie, which is named after my maternal grandmother, who was raised in abject poverty and, bootstrapped her way to middle-class lifestyle and, a world where her granddaughter can be very successful, have a very strong education, and really focused on single women and single moms, because that was the house that I grew up in. My house was a single mom house from the time I was 4. And I know that world up close. Everybody brings money baggage to their conversation, but my money baggage on the single mom and single woman angle of things is very different, because I married at 39. So I was a single woman for a really long time. And I was the daughter of a single mom. I've never been a single mom, but I know what those families look like from the inside, or at least I know what my family looked like from the inside. So it gave me a lot of motivation and interest. And I started it a couple of years ago. I retrained as a chartered financial consultant, which I earned year before last when I had a 6-month-old son. Literally, thank God for remote learning in the pandemic, because Yes. Did some of that in the bathroom because it was the only place it was quiet in the house. And then started AskFlossie. And so I do pro bono consulting. I work with the IRS VITA program, which is a volunteer program to help people really with any kind of lowish income for their area to get free tax preparation. So last year I processed about 450 tax returns. And I love it. I find taxes super nerdy and interesting. And I do pro bono consulting and I educate through AskFlossie.
Was your Flossie, your grandmother, did she also give financial advice? Was she financially savvy in your home?
She was terrified. I think a lot of people who grow up in poverty always carry that fear with them. And,
Sure.
she was this like tiny woman because all of us are Amazons in her family, but she was like 5 feet tall and, weighed as much as a tea bag. And she used to wear her daughter's hand-me-downs. And when people said why, she said, well, I just never want to be poor again. She never wanted to spend money. And so she was very frugal. She was very down to earth. And I think that what carried through in our family was a little bit of that fear of poverty because, then my mom went on to be a single parent, which is just terrifying and risky, and was particularly risky in the early 80s. But also that just like, I was reading some book and they're like, there's this crazy phrase called make do. You can learn to make do with something.
Yep.
And I was like, my mother's been saying that to me my entire life.
Raised on it.
Yep.
Raised on it.
Absolutely.
So I think it gave us this groundedness. And then my dad's family came from money. And there was a real cultural difference there.
Claire, hearing your story, there are a lot of similarities to my family. My grandma, my mom's mom, who is the only grandma that I know, basically, or she passed when I was little, but same thing. I mean, my grandma and my mom and my aunts, my uncle grew up in similar circumstances, very abject poverty. They were able to get out of it through education.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing, my mom, very, very educated, used to be an educator herself, is now retired, married my dad. They got divorced when my brother and I were really tiny. So my mom was a single mom. I mean, thankfully she had her sisters and my grandma and everybody around to help her. But yeah, same, my mom, single mom. I, up until recently, carry some of that fear of poverty, actually a lot of it probably, with me as well. So with you talking about finances as they pertain to not just moms and single moms, but also to single women is mind-blowing. And I'm going to go ahead and say it, revolutionary, because there are very few people in the finance space who are talking about money in respect to single women, and that single women's lives and single women's financial lives are different from everything else that we hear about in this particular space. So thank you, because this is going to help a lot of people.
It's my pleasure. I mean, I think that when we talk about the difference, we could say it's different, but like, how is it different? And I think the biggest way is that it's different, and this is true whether you're a single dad or a single mom, I know both, is that when there's one backstop, risk takes on a whole different structure, right? And that risk takes on your income risk, your housing risk, your savings risk, your medical risk. It's all more acute. And so I think that it means that those protections where people could make different kinds of trade-offs, they can't make other kinds of trade-offs, right? So single women can't make those, and single moms for sure can't make those, or they have to do different math. So an example of this is income. I think it is very, very important that single moms and single women always be pursuing multiple sources of income, even if it's like tiny, even if it's like a side consulting biz that you do 5 hours a month. having one toe in something means that if you have to switch over, you can do it while you're already moving. You've already started on that. You don't have to start it all up from scratch to turn it into money. You can expand into that business. Or if it's like driving for Instacart, shopping for Instacart or driving for Caviar and DoorDash, like it's much easier to expand income streams than it is to like start up income streams. And I think the other thing is that 65% to 70% of women who receive support as a single parent don't get all of it or don't get any. This idea that through child support or spousal support, that there's going to be a payment there. There might be for 5 years, there might be for a year, there might be in-kind support, but the vast majority of women raising children by themselves are not receiving the support to which they are entitled. And
yeah, my mom didn't.
Neither did mine. To go enforce that, you have to give up a lot of rights to the state. It puts a lot of pressure on the ability to save and the ability to earn onto a single woman. The vast majority of single moms work because not because they necessarily want to or it's the best call for their family, but because they absolutely have to. And that can be a wonderful transition, but it can also just be a really tough one, particularly for women with young kids.
Tagging on to that, I really want to bring up something that's on your website that I think is so important. I really hope that little girls are being raised with this because it's so important. But you say on your site, having money of your own is easier to protect and it protects you. There's nothing wrong. In fact, I think it's key for women to have something of their own that is just theirs. And okay, I'm not married. I've never been married, but I think even married women need to have something that's just theirs.
100%. There's an interesting trend for millennials that millennials are much more likely to have separate finances with some joint component rather than like fully joint finances. And
Good for
my husband and
them.
I have totally joint finances, like totally joint. But I still have $1,000 in cash hidden in my office. And I call it the go bag. There's this amazing Schitt's Creek episode where, David disappears and Moira discovers that he's run off with the bag. And it's this like handed down generational bag that they've kept so that they could abscond in the middle of the night to Mexico if they needed to and flee their husbands. And, so the go bag, even if it's just a go bag, I know people who were in high net worth households who had to walk out with 2 kids and $300 because that's what they could find in the house. So I think separate money and separate access to money is really important. Divorces can take a year and a half, 2 years, even longer in some cases. And so in that time, shenanigans happen. So having access to cash, your own cash, is very important. Now that can be Venmo. It can be cash. It can be cash. It can be cash you stash with a friend. I love cash. So it's I think it is important. And I think for single women, we've talked a lot about moms and post-divorce life, but like single women also have their own journey of financial strategy, because I think so much of what personal finance, as an industry teaches is like, here's how to get ready to have kids. Here's how to get ready to retire. And like, here's how you protect yourself as a family and blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, what about a single woman who wants to have impact in some way? How do we help her structure goals and structure her finances and structure independence in a way that isn't about that traditional family structure? It's about her living her best life. And that looks different for every woman. And I think when I was single, it was the piece that I had the most problem with. What am I working towards? Right. I had this like moment at 35 where I had put off getting into real estate because I was like, well, what if I'm married in 2 years? Like, will he want to live here? Literally, it was like 35 and was like, shit. Like, it's not gonna happen. I better get my act together. And spent the whole weekend drunk in Palm Springs with a girlfriend. and then came home, got my act together, bought a house, closed escrow with like literally every dime I could scrape out of my couch, like every single dime it took me to buy my first place. Went to a party and met my husband.
Wow.
That's the best.
It's really hard to plan because God laughs at you when you plan. And it's really hard to plan when you're a single woman because there's no template. There's no template. It looks like what you want it to look like. And we don't narrate, and the financial industry certainly has no idea what to do with single women.
Yeah.
Well, I would think for single women that they would at least have an eye towards retirement at some point and setting themselves up for ease into those years. And that must look so much different for a single income home as it might for a double income home, or it might be for a home that's paying for college expenses, etc. How do you steer women towards planning for a single retirement?
That's a really great question. I think you're right. I think for a lot of women, the idea that they will be single in their retirement is a surprise. You go through a lot of your adult working life being like, oh, this is going to happen at some point. And then you get to 45 or 50 and you're like, well, guess I'm done. Like, I don't even know if I want what's out there anymore.
And that's what happens is all of a sudden you decide, be married.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the first step is really getting your head around what you want your retirement to look like. And like, what does it look like to be in a support structure for you? What does it look like to be engaged with your community? What does it look like for you to feel healthy and well? Lots of things can change in financial planning, but I have one client for whom that means a house on the beach. I have one client for whom that means being active in the mountains for as long as she possibly can be. I think the first piece is just to tune into that path, because there is no external story out there that's going to tell you what it looks like. I think it's hard. I think it requires really pulling up the big girl pants, because you have to look hard both at the numbers and like what it's going to take to get there, and with getting comfortable with being alone. I think that's tough for every human on this planet. We're not designed for it.
Yeah. And I would think also that it has some implications towards if I need long-term care.
Yes.
I don't have a kid who's going to jump in and do it. So how am I planning for if I have some sort of medical need as well, which could be scary, could be real scary.
Totally. And I mean, what's actually more likely is that single women do have kids. So half of single women have kids, and many of them have not been married. So it's like 50-50. And then another third of them are caring for an elder parent. So there's, like financially supporting an elder parent. Like, so I think it's less about like, how do I save a big enough nest egg to ride out whatever is coming when I'm 70, and more, how do I manage investing and my spending requirements now in my 40s and 50s and 60s, when this is all getting expensive for my mom or my kids or whatever, or my life, because I can enjoy it right now, or that's my earning time or my going back to earning time, right? So it's more about really, both figuring out a way to save 20%, which is like extortionately impossible. I hate it when financial educators are like, save 20% of your income.
I've been lucky to save 2%.
Like, are you insane? Like, what?
What world does that happen in?
Right. The average households can't meet a $300 or $400 obligation. Nobody's saving 20%. Nobody's saving 10%. Let's like broker it with reality just a little bit. It's balancing what I think you're implying, which is that like we have a more of an onus on us to save because we live longer. We have lower Social Security payments because we make less through our careers. We are much more likely to become disabled. We are much more likely to be caring for children on our own, and more likely to be caring for parents as well. So like the savings requirement is huge and real, and those don't start when you're 70, right? They start now. And so it's really about juggling. I think ultimately, I was talking to another friend who's a certified financial planner and longtime wealth manager. And she goes, the nut I haven't cracked is single women. It's just so hard. And I was like, the only answer I know is you have to increase your earnings when you can.
Right. Good point.
So increasing earnings, like maybe taking on what you were talking about before with Uber or whatever, gig work maybe,
Yeah.
or what other alternatives are there for increasing earnings?
I wrote a blog post that sort of breaks it into 5 steps. If you've like if you're starting from zero, here's how to go from zero to not zero. So there's getting into income, which is increasing earnings. And for some women who are facing, life after divorce, that's a reality, or they're changing
Yep.
jobs. I think that there's this trade-off that many women face, which is I've got this career that I'm already earning money in, that I may not be the best paid person in my role, in my market. Do I start a side gig, or do I invest in my career that's already making money? Because time is not infinite, right? Like we have to make trade-offs with our time. There's a really important conversation going on right now about, are women being supported at work, right? So the first question is,
Yeah, the answer is no.
yeah.
Let me just put that out there. In general, the answer is no.
That's right. And my guidance on this is that, like, if you have a boss who will work with you to put together a concrete plan for what it means to get promoted and get more money, and that path is a path you want to be on, and you reasonably believe you can make it happen in your job, or you can get yourself into another gig, another job, in that same industry that makes more, whatever. If you can actually concretely see that path and you have support for it, go that path, because you're already making money there.
Got it.
And if you don't, because not everybody has a job where their boss is like, yeah, I'll help you make more money, I'll help you get promoted.
Imagine that.
I know. Sure, I want to support your career. You either got to leave and find one who will, which is, I think, virtually impossible to assess in a job interview. And
Yeah, it is.
and to like go make some money on the side. So much of the economy and so much of business downplays like women's part-time jobs, because women's part-time jobs are for pocket money or whatever. It's like,
Yeah. Or it's seen
wow.
as shameful if you have a part-time job.
Right. And I won't, go and say everybody should be doing MLM, because but there's a lot of different businesses that are structured for women to work part-time. There just are, like one of the things that I think is fascinating is that Utah is one of the leading states for call center reps, and had work from home call center reps because they've got a whole bunch of Mormon families with a mom at home who's got kids at school all day, who wants to pick up a little extra, income for her family. It's just really about thinking about like, what can I fit into my life and my skill set and something that I can handle. And for me, it would be bartending.
Right. So, this is
Bartending's
making me.
faster money.
Ooh.
I love bartending. It's fast money. I'm good at it. I'm not afraid to use the bat behind the bar. Like I can make drinks without counting. So that's how I got myself through college.
Oh, very cool. Okay, this makes me think of a question. This is a situation that has come up actually pretty recently with some of my much younger friends who are pretty early on in their careers. The whole idea of making enough money or getting paid what you're worth, having a side hustle, whatever. In fact, Jennifer and I have learned through our podcast from one of our recent guests, Sandra Davis, where she talks about if you start out not making enough or making less than what you're worth, that's going to continue throughout your professional life, right? And it's very hard to break that cycle to catch up. My question is, because I have younger friends who they're starting out in jobs where they are not making what they're worth. Their whole thing is, well, I should stay at whatever position for a year. I don't want to be seen as a job hopper, blah, blah, blah. But I'm thinking I want to look out for my friends, and I don't want them to get caught in what I got caught in. If you're changing jobs to further your career so that you at least start out in a good spot, then does it really matter, the whole job hopper thing, if you're trying to protect your ability to be financially comfortable?
It's a good question.
I'd be curious what your other guests would say to that question. I'll tell you what I think. I was a manager for many, many, many years. Job hopping is a lot more common than it used to be. Like when I was
Yep.
coming up, if you weren't at some place for 3 years, it was like, what is wrong with you? And now it's like
Yes.
18 months, no big deal. I think if you have a bunch of stuff that's under a year, like a year, 9 months, 10 months, whatever, everyone's like, like
Okay.
that would raise a big flag,
Okay.
because bosses tend to try to hold on to people who are good. And if you've got
Yeah.
4 bosses in a row letting you go,
Mhm.
then that's a signal to somebody who's hiring that maybe there's something funky with you. As a hiring manager, I made that mistake. I think that the most important thing is that there's really 2 things that you get out of a job, right? Like one, you get money, which matters, and benefits, hopefully. But 2, you also get like experience
Right.
to prepare yourself for the next role. And so like in that year, if you if I've maxed out all the experience you're going to get, and they're not going to give you any new opportunities,
Mhm.
bound, because you're not getting the other half. I would say that, push pretty hard on that, right? Because if you've had a bunch of opportunities and not taken them, that's on you. You're not leaving with a great track record. So,
Right.
but if you've maxed out the opportunity, the experiential learning opportunity there, go. But I also think that like the biggest opportunity that women have, and this is what I did, because I started out in book publishing in the 90s, which was nothing. Like it went from, I think I made $17,000 at my first job
Wow.
in London. Yeah, annually.
Wow.
It was crazy. So like
Yeah.
it was just the way the industry was structured back then. And I just fought really, really, really hard to get promoted. I picked up side work. I had 2 jobs for a lot of that time. And then when it came time to switch, I switched into business because I found that I was more interested in that than the editorial piece. I just pushed as hard as I could to way up level my money. And I more than doubled what I made by doing that. And then negotiate. Everybody negotiates. If you go to some place where they're not open to you negotiating as a woman, don't go to there.
Right.
Sorry. That's like
Right.
not the
Right.
best English that I've ever used, but like don't go to there, because I worked for a guy and we were bringing someone on, and she was at a like recruiting event and like cornered him and was like, I'd like to talk about my offer. And he calls me up after. He goes, I just talked to so and so who's going to be joining your team, and she like she cornered me, and she tried to talk about her offer. And I was like, you are very, very senior and twice as old as her. So I'm sure it was tough for you to be cornered. Hope
Right.
everyone listening can hear my air quotes there. So I'm sorry you were intimidated by this young woman cornering you at a cocktail party. And he goes, is she going to be a problem?
Oh God.
And I was like, and this is not that long ago. And I was like, well, my take on that is that if she's negotiating with you, she's going to negotiate with all of her vendors. And somebody who's ferociously looking out for for her own business is going to ferociously look out for my business when she works for
Yep.
me. Doesn't look like a problem to me. Does it look like a problem to you? And he never supported her. If she had seen that flag, if I could have shown her that flag,
Go to a different place. I have a
Yeah.
full body reaction to that. Had she been male and dressed in a suit, he might have been impressed.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
But instead, the aggressive woman is once
She's going to be
again,
a problem.
yes,
She's going to be a
might,
problem.
might be
Love.
too emotional.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Chaps my
I have
ass.
something that I have been wondering about for a long time, because I hear a lot of talk about people who get married get the tax break. But for a single woman with kids, isn't it better for them to be in charge of their own tax returns? Like be head of household and all of that. It seems to me like they might be the more tax savvy.
There's a lot of different factors that go into tax stuff. What you're talking about, I'll explain, but it could be offset by other stuff if they were married. So like generally, so everybody's mileage may vary on this. Don't take me out of hat. If you are not married and you have your own children and he has his own children or she has her own children, you're both entitled to, any single parent who has custody and has negotiated this with their ex, is entitled to claim the head of household status. And the head of household status is like the IRS saying single moms are a person and a half. Because what they do is they give you the standard deduction at like 150% of a single filer's deduction rate. 90% of people who file their taxes use the standard deduction after the Trump tax law. It means that like remarrying for the sake of the tax break may or may not work out. It depends a lot on how much you earn. It penalizes higher earners more than lower earners. There's a number of ways in which our tax system is legitimately a wealth distribution mechanism for women, low-income women, women who have children and dependents. There are some wonderful bureaucrats at the IRS who are like, this is not a good situation going on in our country. 20% of kids have food insecurity.
Right.
We can solve some of this through tax credits.
Yeah.
And they're nominal. I do want to say one thing for the upcoming tax season. We might be launching like right into the middle of it, but it's going to be for lower income earners and particularly for single parents. It's going to be a tougher tax year because we had so many stimulus credits, a much higher child care credit. Just a lot of states had different kinds of credits that just weren't available this year. And there were credits on things like unemployment, and all of that has gone away. And so a lot of families structure their taxes such that they plan what they're going to use that refund for. The refund is going to be much smaller this year than it was the last 2 years for a lot of families. I just want to flag that. It is my number one concern for this tax year is that everybody's going to get a big surprise.
Let me clarify one thing real quick. But in general, being married versus being single is a better tax break or it's not?
It's hard to say because it depends a lot on like the couple. So if it's a single earning household, they tend to take less of a hit. They take much less of a hit than like a 2-income household, which is most households. And higher earners take much more of a hit than lower earners. But there's also a lot of stuff that you can do, like get on somebody's benefits, which is cheaper, right? And so like there's other ways that marriage like does benefit you, and state taxes are so variable, right? Like Washington and Texas have no state income tax. California is bonkers, but they're very beneficial to people at the lower end. It's just it's really hard to generalize, but I wouldn't make marriage financial decisions based on tax breaks, because I think for most people it's not a life-changing amount of money.
It's not what they thought. I've heard that so many times and I'm like, I just don't think it works out that way.
It hurts because I think it particularly hurts for a lot of women who get moved up a tax bracket, who are like used to doing their TurboTax, and they're like, this is great. I do my TurboTax. I have it like all lined up. So I get a little refund or I'm really close and it's good. And then they get married and they get walloped in that first year. And it's like, I'm sorry, what? I owe 10 grand. You're actually overall paying less tax. You just got moved up into his tax bracket because most men make more than their wives.
And this may be a completely, I don't know, useless question, but as the resident single woman who has never been married and is not planning on getting married, are there any good things for us in the tax system? I mean, do we get anything? Do we get credit for anything?
You can do them naked because no one's
You
around.
can do them naked in your house with a glass of wine.
That's it. That's all you get, Raquel.
Damn it.
I mean, you can do that if you're married with children too, but people might be concerned and call your mom. That's what would happen in my house. Claire is naked, drinking wine and doing the taxes in the dining room.
Do we have to be concerned?
Exactly. Not so much in the tax system. Tiffany Aliche, who is a Black financial educator known more popularly as the Budgetnista, is like, I just got goosebumps saying her name. I love her so much. And she talks a lot about the ability for single women to make impact in their communities in terms of building generational wealth because they don't have kids. And so they're not losing as much money throughout their earning life to paying for daycare, right? I paid $2,000 for daycare. someone who is
Oh,
my
yeah.
sister who doesn't have
Daycare.
kids, yeah, is like able to save and do things and travel. And one of the things that Tiffany talks about is, and is very intentional and talks about this frequently, is like how she impacts generational wealth within her extended family and within her community. And
Oh,
I think that is one of the most exciting things for single women, is that there's more risk because it's just you, and like you don't have
right.
kids, you may or may not have kids to take care of you, but there's also a lot less cost, right?
Yeah.
I ate
Okay.
an apple and like frozen lasagna every night for dinner and drank cheap wine on the couch watching Netflix when I was a single woman. It was wonderful and it was so cheap. It can create these opportunities to think about impact,
Okay.
financial impact in a different way.
It's interesting that you bring up generational wealth with regard to single women, because I've always kind of thought about that because I'm like, well, I don't have kids. I think, well, generational wealth, that doesn't really apply to me because I don't have kids. But you're saying that it applies in a broader sense,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
my community or younger generations in my family, or even in my friends' kids,
Yep.
possibly.
Or
Okay.
your brother's
Yeah.
children.
Yeah. My brother's kids for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that, we live in individual little boxes separated from our extended families now, but human history isn't like that, right? Like
Mhm.
we're designed to live in sort of tribal units. So I think there's this really interesting question about like, how do we more broadly impact our tribe? How
Mm.
do we take our wealth and lift the next generation of women through education or through empowerment or through creating opportunities for them? One way to think about generational wealth is paying for people's educations, particularly now that there's much more you can do with a 529 account, right?
Mhm.
Create a 529s account for the kids in your life so that you're helping out a little bit, because you can move that beneficiary around, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you
Huh.
can set it up for Timmy or nephew, and then it can, after Timmy goes to school, or if Timmy decides to go do something else, join the Merchant Marine and sail off into the sunset, you can redirect it to someone else, and you can roll it over into a Roth IRA for Timmy. You can make yourself the beneficiary if you're in his, you can move it to a different family member. So you can
Right.
make that other family member the beneficiary for educational purposes, or you can roll some of that money into a Roth IRA as of next year, or as of this year.
That's
It's 2023.
I never would have thought about that. Interesting. Thank you so much, Claire.
But there's also one other thing to think about, is that I think we tend not to look at community colleges, but community colleges are one of the like best levers in the country, and trade schools, for helping people who are coming from less family wealth to level up, right? Like, so
Mhm.
a lot of people go to a 2-year college and then go to a 4-year college, or go to a 2-year college and then get a degree, or the first person to go get a 2-year college degree. So providing opportunities through your local community college, either through your knowledge or through your resources, is also a
Mhm.
great way to help lift people in your community, or some other educational thing at that like post high school, early college level. You can really lever them up in terms of what they'll leave with for earnings.
My experience with the 529 plan is it doesn't take that much of a huge commitment. So I set one up for both of my kids when they were young. I put I'm just going to share with everyone my retirement plan because it's not that grand. I put every month, like clockwork, $50 in Olivia's 529, $50 in Gabby's 529, and $50 in my own retirement plan. That's all I had. So that's what I
Yeah.
did with it.
That's awesome.
And I did that pre-check, so I never saw it. I never saw the money. It never really hurt me financially. And then my daughter graduated from high school and was ready to go to college. She went to a very expensive college. And luckily, she quit after the first semester and came back and went to community college. And I saved $50 a month, and that put her through community college. She got a 2-year degree.
Wow.
It wasn't what I thought we were going to have. I thought she'd go to a big fancy college, and she didn't, and that's great. And she has her degree, and we did that with my $50 a month savings
Yep.
plan.
And the other
Yeah,
thing
so
is that starting it early, I mean, the biggest financial power is time. So
Yeah.
starting savings account early, and then also investing it, and then having that compound interest. A lot of
Yeah.
529 plans are set up with target date funds, where you
Yeah,
like
mine
put the
was.
target date of like the year they're going in, or an index fund, which is also great. As long as, I just want to caution everyone, some 529 plans have really high fees. Like the funds in them have really high fees. Pick a cheap one. Pick one where they charge you like not much money, because they're not doing anything. I guarantee there's nothing, no human is being paid for that. So like pick a cheap index fund or target date fund and lose the login. Just make sure that the money's going in every month. That's
Yeah. I think that was the key, is I just barely even noticed what was happening with it. I just let it keep going, and not having the money in my pocket to write a check. It came out before I ever saw it.
I am like, everyone has their thing that they're great at. Like I am an amazing spender.
Me too. Same.
And so,
I can spend with
like,
the best of them.
yeah. So I'm like all about the pay yourself first. I pay myself first. It's automated. The second I get a paycheck, all the bills are paid. There's no money will hit my hot little hands, because bad things happen. So
Yep.
I'm with you on that. I love all those financial educators who are just so frugal. I read their books and I'm like, that is not me. That is so not me. I could never do that.
It's so great. All right. On your website, you said, and I just want to touch on this. I know we did a little bit, but briefly, you said personal finance traditionally overvalues the perspective of men serving other wealthy men in the financial industry, and undervalue that of women and practical experience. How are women getting undervalued?
That's a really great question. You were the first person who's ever asked me that. I love that. I hate it when people are like, that's a great question. So let's think about the financial industry, right? The personal finance industry. Back in the 80s, it was a bunch of stockbrokers, right? There weren't really financial planners or financial advisors unless you were super wealthy and you had somebody like doing the whole business. And so then all these stockbrokers, who are really just sales guys, boomer type generation, they realize that they have to sell more holistic services and also insurance. So they become quote unquote financial advisors. Now, the people that they're used to selling to are men, because in that generation, most of the earners who had enough wealth to attract a sales guy were dudes. And they also had the income to protect, because there were more single income households. So the two big offerings, right, stock purchasing and insurance, were targeted towards that market. And the only people in finance, I mean, there were a few women in finance, but like finance is historically very, very male dominated. So it was dudes selling two products to other dudes. They would get a widow or a divorced woman, but most of the clients with the real money were men. And also historically, because women make less, because we trade less frequently, which actually works greatly to our benefit as investors, we save and we buy stuff that's not very risky, like index funds or target date funds. We're not as likely to be going wild with crypto or similar sorts of derivatives. So that means that we're less attractive as a market. So the market didn't form for women to be doing vanilla stuff like finances to take care of their children and support their parents and keep a house together. And so there's just not as much maturity in terms of like what financial education or products or structures are out there for us as a market. And also because we're like relatively new as major earners, right? We're two generations into like really earning, right? Because my mom, you could get fired for just being pregnant, right?
Yep.
You could get fired. It was expected that you would quit your job when you had kids. And so like, now that's illegal, and it keeps more women in the workplace. Income, the lack of job growth has kept more women in the workplace. There's more money that we need to figure out what to do with. And because there's more protections for divorced women when people are more likely to be divorced. So now we're a market, but the market hasn't really caught up with us yet. And so I think that what we're going to see is different offerings, different kinds of financial education. There's an explosion in TikTok education and Instagram education. And like, I am all for it. There's a really fantastic woman called the Broke Black Girl on
Yeah,
Instagram.
I follow her.
I love her. And like, she does earnings challenges. She just started her earnings challenge for the year. It's a 52-week savings challenge. Just, you know what? By the end of the year, she like posts the average number that everybody saved. And it's like over $1,000, right? Those are inspiring. And she's not a former stockbroker or finance guy, right? She's a divorced mom with 2 young boys. And so I think that there's like a lot of experiential stuff that women bring. Women are also like, I forget the number, but it's like 80% of consumer purchases are made by women in this country. So like, we are managing tremendous amounts of money. We just don't have a lot of wealth or income. So I think that we have a ton of financial experience, just not the kind that makes us rich. I think we're going to start seeing more of that shift in the way finance is educated and the way products are offered.
Aside from, or maybe in addition to the experiential stuff that you're seeing, are you seeing any formal education or formal programs or offerings that are starting to come out to help women in education? In finance?
Yeah, I think that they're mostly offered by other women. I think the Dumpster
Yeah, that's
Doggy,
what I'm saying.
Amanda Holden offers a really fabulous investing 101 class. She's doing an ethical investing workshop. You know, her handle is the Dumpster Doggy. She spent 10 years in wealth management. So she has like fantastic experience. There's a lot more women who are becoming CFPs and ChFCs, which was my route. And then there's more women doing tax. So like, honestly, you know, we want to like poo-poo. I don't love TikTok. I won't have it on my app because of its relationship to the Chinese state, but I love Instagram and the level of financial education on Instagram. They're not always right. They don't always get the technical stuff right. But to be honest, like, personal finance is really personal, right? You have to work through your baggage and what you want to do before, you know, like, budgeting is easy. Figuring out how to deal with your like childhood trauma about being raised poor or being raised having all the money go away or whatever it was, that's really hard. That's the real work.
Yeah, it is.
You just nailed it. My niece and I get in a fight about a budget all the time, and she's always like, why do you always get so tense when I say the word budget? And it's childhood.
Yeah.
It's shit in our head.
Yeah.
It's the story we tell ourselves.
It is the trauma too. I mean, we carry that in our bodies.
Yeah.
Because I know for the longest time, even for years and years and years, whenever I would talk about money, I literally would just start crying. Literally. And I've done it probably on our podcast too. So
I feel so honored that I did not make you cry yet today.
We're not done. It could still
I think there's also this thing, which is that like, as a woman, you get all these subtle cues about your relationship to money. Like there's this fabulous myth, which is wrong, by the way, that women are like racking up tons of credit card debt because they're crazy spenders. Well, women do most of the spending in the country because women are the chief operating officers of like almost every household. Women who carry debt independently handle it far more responsibly. This has been in peer-reviewed studies. We're less likely to have like high interest rate personal loans. We're more likely to use credit for necessities because we don't make enough money and we need to bridge low income moments. We're less likely to use it on stuff like cars, which depreciate very quickly, and more likely to use it on stuff like furniture. We're less likely to have mortgages, which everyone is like, that's a great kind of debt. Well, women can't get the down payment together to get the fucking mortgage. So of course they don't have mortgages. And also mortgages aren't great debt. It is one of those things where like, I really struggle in my career not to be like Debbie Downer, because as much as I love Rachel Dratch, like it's hard, you know, like it is really hard to do this work honestly and to do it in an upbeat way. And I am the like biggest nerd of all time. Like I do sit down and read accounting newsletters every morning. Accounting Today is like my coffee. What I like to do is partner with women who tend to be younger and tend to be less technically nerdy and who have fantastic life experience, right? There's There's so many on Instagram, like Side Hustle Pro is awesome.
Ooh.
Like
Oh yeah,
there's
I follow her too.
yeah, she's so great, right? And Yokio De Niro, like Janice. I think there's a real difference between, I like to think of myself as like bridging the technical stuff with the personal and experiential stuff, because that's where I come at it from. I just went and got the technical stuff because I'm a nerd like that. I think we're going to see that changing, where women are going to look at a mutual fund run by a dude in New York
Mhm,
who's charging a percent. No, like no. And to
mhm,
be
Yeah.
honest, like
Like, no,
women,
that's what I want to say. No,
like, no, like no, thank you.
no.
Like why?
mhm,
Why? You guys don't outperform index
mhm,
funds. Why?
mhm,
And
mhm.
I think the other thing is that like women as investors, it's between 0.4% and 1% annually that they outperform men. That is what a professional investor charges. There's so much hype around it's crypto and we're trading and we're day traders and you got to get this stock, you got to get that stock. No, like it's just not necessary. A lot of the stuff that the market is focused on just isn't as important as like having the right health insurance plan, having a good term life insurance so that when you die as a fabulous single woman, each one of your nephews gets a little chunk of change to start their lives with, tax free.
Yep.
There's pieces of personal finance that just get overlooked.
It's funny that you say that you don't want to be Debbie Downer, blah blah blah. But I don't find your information in any way depressing at all. In fact, I find your information very empowering, especially all of the information that you have about how to protect yourself, how to plan, how to prepare for a divorce, how to
Yeah.
prepare for big changes in your life. That stuff is amazing. And yes, it's big emotional stuff that you have to think about and keep in mind and all that stuff, but it's from a place of self-empowerment and
Mhm.
protecting yourself. If you can talk a little bit about, because you have the checklist on your website about how to leave your husband,
Yeah.
or how to leave whatever spouse. If you can talk to that a little bit, because I think that's key. I mean, there's some really important information in there. I actually feel like hopefully some of that information can also help people who are not in legally recognized relationships, but are still entangled and are trying to break free from that.
Mhm.
So if
Yeah.
you can talk to some of that, that would be
Sure.
really awesome.
Sure. There's a ton of stuff on my blog about this in the divorce section. There's a couple of things I just want to highlight quickly. The first is that the time before a divorce and during a divorce process and immediately after a divorce are the toughest, most financially risky parts. 5 years later, like 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, it just gets easier and easier and easier, even if you don't land where you think you're going to land, because transitions are financially risky. They're emotionally exhausting. Like we're not designed for them as humans. It's tough to like really work through that. I put together that stuff that is more comprehensive just so that women can walk through it step by step, because the plan is the most important part. I think that the piece that's really important about the plan is that if you're leaving a domestic violence situation, if you are leaving a situation where you think someone could react very strongly, even if it's not violently, it's really important to have a plan, not just for where you end up, but for how you're going to transition there safely. And
Mhm.
that looks different for everybody. Having some cash, having copies of documents. You don't need to know what you're going to do, but you need to know what's there. What is any kind of marital property, taking pictures of your home, making sure that you've got some documentation so that if shenanigans ensue, which they often do, that you've got things written down.
I think it's important to note that this is information that people who are married should have anyway.
Absolutely.
Be an empowered member of your marital unit and don't just leave it all to one person. Be informed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people worry about it creating conflict, and it certainly
Yeah.
does in marriages. But any kind of conflict, any kind of trouble is the opportunity to build that muscle as a partnership. And I think that I do this for a living. It is one of my and my husband's superpowers as a couple, is that we are able to really work through stuff to financially together. It's like a shared priority for both of us. And like when we're talking about money issues, I have to remind myself to like take a deep breath, don't get fired up, hear them out, take it seriously, like think through it slowly. We don't have to like do anything instantly. And to remember to be present in the conversation, even when like everything is getting triggered in my background, right? Where I'm like, just keep it calm, keep it cool, participate. And by doing that, you can kind of start building that muscle a little bit. But like it was ugly early on for us. We've gotten a lot better at it, but we really had to work at it.
Well, even you as a financial professional are
Yeah,
having the same reactions as us mere mortals.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there anything, Claire, that we have not brought up or have not asked you or given you a chance to talk about that you think we really need to touch on?
This has been really fun and we could sit here and chat all day. One thing I'm reading right now, two really interesting books I'm reading. Oh gosh, I forget the full title. The Afro-Minimalist's Guide to Finances, I think it's called. The Afro-Minimalist is a financial educator who I really like. I like the way she approaches thinking about consumption and about money. It's really different from what we hear from other people, and she approaches it really differently. And I also want to flag Finance for the People by Paco de Leon, which has one great chapter in it called Why Are We Weird About Money? It's the first chapter. Get it from the library. Very recommended reading for a lot of the stuff we've been talking about around like, how do I deal with my stuff around work? I think it's really great.
You've given us a lot to think about. You really taught us a lot. And I love that you have kind of given shout outs to other people too, who are in similar spaces to yours and are giving really great information. So
Totally
I dig
cool.
that. Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I benefit so much from their knowledge and their wisdom that it would be crappy of me to not share it.
Well, I dare say that if not they, then we definitely are learning from what you are doing. You are adding to that knowledge base that's helping so many people. You're just helping to bring it all out into the light and helping so many people to work through all this. So thank you for the great work that you're doing, and please continue.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so very welcome. Thank you for being with us. Claire is a total badass. Absolute badass. I love that she talks about finance in such a real way, and then also admits that, hey, I'm a financial professional and I have baggage around all this stuff. I still have to use all my tools to calm down talking about money.
Sex and money, the two biggest things in a marriage that,
yeah.
But what I thought really, really clicked for me, and it just kind of came together when she was talking about building that budget. I used to be in banking. I know how to build a budget. We had Sandra on. She taught us how to build a budget. I've never not known how to do a budget. I am so anti building a budget. And my niece is like, why? And it finally occurred to me, it's because I was raised by a single mom. And it's because just like me, my mom knew exactly how much money it costs to raise a family. And we don't make that much money. We don't make enough to raise the family. So when we were talking to Sandra on her episode and we talked about the deficit, I already know what the deficit is. And then when we talk about investing and all of these things, of course we all want to do it, but we don't have the dollars. Like we're just single women, single moms, single dads, probably some single men. The world has changed. People don't have a whole lot of disposable income. We're living paycheck to paycheck, people.
Yeah.
We just
are
making
literally, we're literally making do. Like
we're just making it.
Yeah, like Claire said, we're making do, and we're doing the best we can with what we have. That's a saying that my One of my aunts used to say all the
Yep.
time, we're doing the best we can with what we have. And to know that there are professionals in the finance space who acknowledge that and are still trying to offer usable, useful information and tactics so that we can move beyond just make and do is amazing. And I know we mentioned a lot of Instagram people and stuff like that, but that's one of the ways that we're finding these particular finance professionals. And thank God for social media in this way, because it's allowing them the platform that they need, that they can afford, that they can utilize, so that we can find them and we can find their information. We don't necessarily have to have, oh, I have $50,000 to start some big money management fund that some dude is going to manage.
Yeah, and I
Right?
love the way she says dude all the
I
time.
know.
One dude managing another dude's money. It's so great.
I know. She's so down to earth. It's just great. I'm slowly but surely becoming less uncomfortable talking about money. Like, I didn't cry in this episode. I can't wait for our listeners to find Claire and go down the rabbit hole of that woman's website, AskFlossie, because there's a lot of good info in there, and just dig in. I mean, there's so much great empowering information there.
And good kudos to her for all the pro bono work. And if you're out there and you're listening and you don't know what to do, you're scared about something, maybe contact her. I'm guessing she could at least steer you in the right direction. Ask Flossie.
Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.